3 nights ago, at 3,000 in the morning, a radio with no antenna and no power said my name twice. Then it read the latitude and longitude of the room I was standing in. My name is Cole Mercer. For 11 years, I maintained K7, WVN, a radio relay tower on a mountain 9,400 feet above the valley. I knew every signal that passed through that station. I knew every electrical hum, every loose fan bearing, every burst of interference caused by snow, lightning, or aircraft. But at 3007 every morning, the entire radio band went silent for exactly 90 seconds. That was when the voices came through. They always followed the same pattern. A name, spoken twice, then coordinates. The first name belonged to a missing man. The last one belonged to me. K7. WVN stood on a bare granite knob above the tree line. The tower itself was 240 feet of rust-colored steel, held upright by cables thick as a man's wrist. At the top was a red aviation beacon. It blinked once every 3 seconds, all night, every night. From the valley, it looked like a small red star hanging above the fog. At the base of the tower was a concrete transmitter building with one reinforced door, one narrow window, and enough equipment inside to keep 3 counties connected. Public radio used the main transmitter. Emergency services used the microwave link. The forestry department had a narrowband repeater for fire crews. There were other signals, too. Signals that appeared in the maintenance logs, but not on any license. I learned early not to ask about those. My schedule was 4 nights on the mountain, followed by 3 nights off. There was a bunk room behind the transmitter racks, a propane stove, a coffee machine, and a landline that only worked when the weather was good. Most shifts were quiet. I checked the generator fuel, inspected the coaxial lines, cleaned ice from the ventilation covers, and recorded the meter readings. Around midnight, the commercial station ended its final program. After that, I sat alone beneath the equipment lights and listened. Radio technicians spend a lot of time listening to nothing. Silence tells you almost as much as sound. A faint whine might mean a damaged power supply. A repeating pulse could mean a loose connection. Static that rises and falls slowly is usually distant weather. The silence at 3007 was different. Every active frequency dropped at once. The music disappeared. The emergency repeater stopped transmitting. Even the background interference vanished. For 90 seconds, every speaker in the building produced the same clean, empty hiss. Then, at 3008 and 30 seconds, everything returned. The first time I saw it happen, I assumed the monitoring equipment had failed. By my 3rd shift, I understood that it happened every night. Exactly on time. For the first few months, there was nothing inside the silence. Then, during a snowstorm in February, someone spoke. I had been working at K7 WVN for less than a year. The wind was strong enough to shake ice from the tower. Every few minutes, frozen pieces struck the roof like handfuls of gravel. At 3007, the frequencies dropped. I was watching the signal meter when a man's voice came through the monitoring speaker. It was faint and badly distorted, as though it had traveled through several damaged transmitters. The man said, "Daniel Haskins." There was a pause. Then he said it again. "Daniel Haskins." After that came 2 numbers. Latitude. Longitude. I wrote them down automatically. That is what technicians do when something strange enters a system. You document it before you start guessing. I checked the receiver. I checked the cables. I switched monitoring channels. The voice continued through every speaker in the room. When the 90 seconds ended, the radio station returned in the middle of a song. The next morning, I entered the coordinates into a mapping program. They pointed to an old logging road 17 miles south of the tower. The name meant nothing to me, so I searched the county newspaper archive. Daniel Haskins had disappeared from that logging road 6 years earlier. His truck had been found with the driver's door open. His keys were still in the ignition. Search teams had followed his footprints from the road into the forest, but the tracks ended beside a frozen stream. His body was never recovered. I told myself someone had transmitted the information as a joke. It was not a convincing explanation, but it allowed me to finish the shift. 2 months later, another voice entered the silence. This time, it was a woman. She said her name twice, then read another set of coordinates. They pointed to a trailhead near the eastern county line. She had disappeared there 14 years earlier. The third voice belonged to a teenage boy who vanished while hunting with his father. The fourth belonged to an elderly woman whose abandoned car had been found on a mountain pass. Every coordinate marked the last place someone had been seen alive, not where their bodies had been discovered. Most of them had never been found. At first, the voices came only once every few months. Then, once every few weeks. By my 5th year at the station, they came several times a month. I stopped reporting them. The first time I mentioned the phenomenon to my supervisor, he stared at me for several seconds and asked whether I had been sleeping properly. I said I had. He told me mountain isolation affected people differently and suggested I take a few days off. After that, I kept my own notebook. Date, time, name, coordinates, signal strength, even though the meter never registered anything. I also began recording the transmissions. The recordings captured the dead air, but not the voices. When I played them back, I heard only static. I tried different microphones and recorders. Analog tape. Digital audio. A direct line from the monitoring output. The result was always the same. I could hear the voice while it happened. The equipment could not. That frightened me more than the names. A signal has to exist somewhere. It needs a frequency, a carrier wave, an electrical path. A voice cannot simply appear in a speaker. So I performed every test I knew. One night, I disconnected the monitoring receiver from the tower antenna and attached it to a dummy load. The voice still came through. The next night, I shut down the main transmitter. The voice returned at 3007. I turned off the generator, disconnected the building from the mains, and ran a portable receiver from a fresh battery. A missing child whispered her name through it. Finally, I removed the battery while she was still speaking. The display went dark. The speaker continued producing her voice for another 7 seconds. Then it stopped. I sat on the floor beside the receiver until sunrise. After that, I no longer believed the voices were coming through the tower. The tower was only giving them somewhere to be heard. Over the years, I learned more about the people whose names entered the station. I found old news reports, police bulletins, and interviews with relatives. Most had disappeared within 50 miles of the mountain. A few were farther away. The earliest cases were more than 100 miles out. There was another detail I did not notice at first. The voice changed every time. I had assumed it was one person reading a list of names, but that was wrong. The Daniel Haskins transmission had been spoken in Daniel Haskins's voice. I confirmed it when I found an old television interview recorded 2 weeks before his disappearance. The rhythm was the same. The slight whistle on the letter S was the same. Every missing person announced their own name, or something used their voice to do it. During my 10th year at the tower, the transmissions became more frequent. The coordinates also began moving closer. A campsite 38 miles away. A forest road 23 miles away. an abandoned quarry 14 miles away. Then, last winter, the voice of a missing surveyor named Peter Vale gave coordinates less than 6 miles from K7, WVN. I drove there after sunrise. The location was beside a service road at the edge of the forest. There was nothing unusual about it, except for an old radio lying beneath the trees. It was the type forestry crews had used in the 1980s: heavy plastic body, long antenna, large tuning dial. The battery compartment was empty. When I lifted it, the speaker made a soft clicking sound. Once every 3 seconds. The same rhythm as the red beacon. I left the radio where I found it. That evening, I took every notebook I had kept over the previous 11 years and spread the coordinates across the floor of the transmitter building. I marked each location on a large topographical map. From a distance, the pins looked random. Then I added the dates. The oldest locations formed a wide arc around the mountain. Later cases curved inward. Year after year, the coordinates tightened around K7. WVN. They formed a spiral. The missing people were not scattered. They were points on a path. And the center of that path was the tower. The next transmission came from a woman named Laura Bell. She had disappeared 9 days earlier. Her coordinates were less than 2 miles from the station. I searched the area the following morning and found one of her boots beside the switchback road. There were no footprints around it. No tracks. No disturbed snow. The boot stood upright in the middle of the road, as though someone had carefully placed it there. That was when I decided to shut down the station. My supervisor had not authorized it, but I no longer cared. At 3:00 the following morning, I turned off the main transmitter. Then the emergency link. Then the generator. I opened the exterior breaker and cut power to the aviation beacon. For the first time in 30 years, K7 WVN went completely dark. I stood outside beneath the tower and looked up. The red beacon was no longer blinking. For 7 seconds, nothing happened. Then it came back on. Not dimly. Not flickering. Fully illuminated. There was no power running to it. I had physically disconnected the circuit. But the beacon continued blinking. Once every 3 seconds. At 3007, I heard someone speaking inside the transmitter building. I went back in. The racks were dark. Every display was blank. The voice was coming from a speaker I had removed from the wall and disconnected months earlier. It sat on the workbench with its wires hanging loose. The voice said, "Cole Mercer." I could not move. It said my name again. Cole Mercer. Then it read the coordinates of K7 WVN. The voice was mine. Not similar to mine. Not an imitation. Mine. It had the same slight rasp I get after drinking too much coffee. The same habit of breathing through my nose between phrases. I heard myself speaking from a disconnected speaker in a powerless building. The transmission ended after 90 seconds. When the main power returned, the speaker was silent. I left the mountain before sunrise. I drove directly to the county office and told my supervisor I was resigning. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me to close the door. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a maintenance log from K7 WVN. It was dated 29 years earlier. The technician assigned to the station at the time was named Harold Quinn. My supervisor opened the log to the final page. At 3000 on Harold Quinn's last night, the tower had received a voice. A name, spoken twice. Then coordinates. The name was Harold Quinn. The coordinates belonged to K7 WVN. Harold disappeared before the next shift arrived. His truck was still parked outside. The transmitter building was locked from the inside. No trace of him was ever found. My supervisor said the tower had operated normally ever since. I asked why nobody had warned me. He looked at the old logbook and said, "Because the voices stopped after Harold disappeared." I returned to the mountain tonight. I told myself I came back to destroy the equipment, but that is not true. The tower is not causing this. The radios are not causing it. The beacon is not guiding something toward the mountain. The spiral was never closing around the tower. It was closing around whoever was listening. It stopped with Harold. Then, years later, when I took the night shift, it began again. The tower does not need power. It needs an ear. It needs someone to hear the names. It needs someone to remember them. It is 3000 now. The transmitter building is dark. I have removed the antenna. The breakers are open. The disconnected speaker is sitting on the table in front of me. Outside, the red beacon is no longer blinking. For the first time, it is burning continuously. Something has started moving on the tower. I can hear the steel vibrating above the roof. Slowly. One section at a time. At first, I thought something was climbing toward the beacon. But the sound is getting lower. It is coming down. The clock has changed to 3007. Every radio in the room has gone silent. The disconnected speaker just turned on. My voice is coming through it again. It has said my name. It has read the coordinates. But this time, it did not stop. It is still speaking. I would like to say, I am afraid. The truth is worse. I am curious what I will say next.